My name is Lenora Whitfield. I'm 70 years old, widowed, and have spent the better part of my life building a life I could be proud of. One stitch at a time, one brick at a time. Today, I had been looking forward to a quiet morning at my beach house on Sullivan's Island, a place I had created with my own hands and hard-earned savings. The drive along the coastline was soothing, the scent of salt and seaweed mingled with the soft hum of the Atlantic waves. I imagined stepping onto the deck with my coffee, letting the breeze wash over me as I read the morning news. But as I rounded the final bend and the familiar wooden fence came into view, my heart skipped a beat. 3 cars I didn't recognize were parked in the driveway. Loud, upbeat music thumped from inside the house. The front door stood wide open, and voices angry, demanding, and loud carried across the sand. My stomach tightened as I climbed out of the car, my hands trembling on the keys I had held so carefully. I stepped onto the porch and froze. There in the center of my sanctuary stood Megan, my daughter, or at least the woman who had once been a daughter-in-law I'd welcomed warmly into our family. She was surrounded by half a dozen people I didn't know, their faces unreadable, but clearly judgmental. My house, the sanctuary I had poured 2 decades into, suddenly felt foreign. Megan's eyes locked onto mine with a mixture of triumph and scorn, and her voice carried over the laughter and chaos like a whip. "Why is that old parasite here? We have no space." I gripped my keys tighter, swallowing a lump in my throat. For a moment, I wasn't sure whether to step inside or retreat. The house I had built, loved and protected for 20 years, had been claimed without my consent. And just like that, the peaceful morning I had imagined vanished, leaving me staring at the threshold of the conflict that was about to unfold. The words cut through the morning air like shards of glass. "Why is that old parasite here? We have no space." Megan's voice carried across the deck, sharp and unyielding. I froze, my chest tightening as if I had been shoved backward by the force of her contempt. Children scrambled around my deck, their bare feet thudding against the wooden boards, laughing and shouting, kicking a soccer ball dangerously close to the red geraniums I had nurtured for years. A wicker chair I had placed just last summer was toppled onto its side, a towel draped across its arm, while a stack of magazines lay scattered beneath a sprawl of children's toys. The smell of burnt pancakes from the kitchen mixed with the faint tang of sunscreen and sweat, and it all assaulted me at once. I took a tentative step forward, hoping for a pause, some recognition of the audacity before me. Megan, however, didn't even blink. She stood with her hands on her hips, wearing my favorite apron, the one I had embroidered a decade ago, her eyes cold, calculating, triumphant. Behind her, her sister Veronica and 2 teenagers exchanged knowing glances, while an older woman, Megan's mother, watched me as if I were a trespasser. I tried to summon calm, my voice tight but measured. "Megan, I didn't expect you here," I said, my words faltering under her gaze. She laughed, a cruel, triumphant sound that made my stomach churn. "Robert said we could use the house whenever we wanted," she shot back. "Besides, we're doing something productive here. You just come to complain and ruin the fun." The children froze mid-laugh, sensing the tension, while Megan's mother smirked at me, her eyes scanning me as though inspecting an artifact long past its usefulness. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to inhale deeply. My sanctuary, my labor of love, had been transformed into a stage for humiliation, and I had no idea how to reclaim it. The day I had imagined in serenity was gone. Chaos had claimed my house, and with it, the illusion of safety I had carried for 20 years. I stepped back from the chaos of my deck and let my eyes wander across the garden, now trampled and scattered with toys. The sight stung, but it also pulled me into a memory I had carried for decades. My name is Lenora Whitfield, and I had spent the last 50 years stitching together a life that was entirely my own. Every penny I saved from tailoring wedding dresses, school uniforms, and alterations had been set aside for one purpose: a sanctuary, a home I could call mine, built from the ground up. I remembered the day I first set foot on this empty lot on Sullivan's Island. I had just become a widow 50 years old with a 25-year-old son and nothing but determination. The lot was overgrown weeds reaching toward the sky, the sand uneven, and the wind cutting through my thin blouse. I had my savings book in one hand, my worn work shoes scuffed from decades of labor in them, and a vision in my mind that refused to be ignored. For 2 years, every weekend, I supervised the construction myself. I carried sand-painted walls, planted the first trees that would later provide shade over the deck, and positioned windows to catch the morning sun. Robert had come whenever his college schedule allowed, and together we chose the tiles, the creamy colors for the walls, the placement of every cabinet, and the flow of each room. Every detail mattered, because this house wasn't just wood and brick. It was proof that a woman could endure, survive, and create something lasting on her own. I thought about the nights I returned home exhausted but proud, counting the receipts for every dollar spent, tallying the hours I had worked for clients so that nothing would be missing from the construction budget. I thought about the late nights, sewing my fingers raw from needle pricks, earning the money that would pay for the next week of supplies. And then I remembered the first time Robert stood on the deck, eyes shining with excitement, and whispered, "Mom, are we really going to have a beach house?" "Yes, son." I had said, my voice firm but soft. "We're going to build it with our own hands every step of the way." That pride, that independence, that sense of accomplishment, they had always been my shield against the world's judgment. And now, seeing Megan's family treat my home as if it were theirs, laughing and scuffing the floors I had polished, I felt that shield wobble, but it did not break. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, letting the salt air fill my lungs, anchoring me to the woman I had been all these years, resilient, meticulous, and unyielding. My beach house was more than property. It was a symbol of every choice I had made, every sacrifice endured, every lesson passed to my son. This thought grounded me, even as my daughter's words still echoed across the deck. Somehow, I knew I could not let 2 decades of labor, love, and resilience be erased by arrogance and entitlement. I would find a way to remind them all exactly what this house and I were worth. I paced slowly across the deck, my eyes scanning every corner of my beach house, now transformed into someone else's playground. At first, I had thought Megan's presence and the chaos that accompanied her was a rash, impulsive decision. But as I looked closer at the precise way the furniture had been moved, the carefully placed toys, and the notes scattered on the kitchen counter, it became clear this was no accident. The documents on the counter, unsigned, but already prepared, were too neat, too deliberate. My personal mail, which I usually found stacked and tidy, had been rifled through. Even the arrangement of the children's sleeping areas seemed calculated to occupy every inch of space, leaving me nowhere to claim even a quiet corner. Every detail spoke of planning, of forethought. Someone had thought through how to invade my sanctuary and make me feel powerless. And then the worst thought began to gnaw at me. Robert, my son, the boy I had raised with all my love, the young man I had supported through college who had once run to my side when I was overwhelmed, had he allowed this? Had he sanctioned it quietly while I remained oblivious? The idea felt like a cold hand gripping my heart. Could he really have stood by complicit in this humiliation? While his wife trampled the home I had built with my own hands, I clenched my fists, forcing myself to breathe steadily. memories of late nights helping Robert with homework sewing until my fingers bled, and painstakingly saving every penny for this house surged through me. I had trusted him to protect this legacy, to understand what this home meant, not just the wood and nails, but the labor, the dreams, the life I had poured into it. The thought of betrayal made my blood burn, but it also awakened a resolve I hadn't felt in years. No one, not Megan, not Robert, not anyone, would strip me of what I had created without a fight. My sanctuary, my labor, my life's proof of resilience would not be taken from me quietly. I paused in the middle of the living room, letting the sounds of children laughing and Megan's triumphant voice fill the air and allowed the anger to solidify into determination. If deception had brought them here, then truth and action would be my weapons. This house, my home, would not belong to them by default. And with that thought, I knew exactly what I had to do next. I had barely caught my breath from the morning's chaos when I noticed a manila envelope tucked between the cookbooks on my kitchen counter. Its weight felt heavier than paper should, as though it carried the air of inevitability. My fingers trembled as I opened it, revealing neat stacks of documents that made my stomach sink. At first glance, they looked official, typed on legal letterhead, stamped with seals, signatures, poised for final approval. But as I scanned the words, my pulse quickened. Requests to transfer the property deed from my name to Robert's. Notations about my incapacity and diminished mental competency. The paper screamed deception, the handwriting in the margins unmistakably. Megan's plotting, outlining, anticipating every legal step. I sank into the nearest chair, gripping the envelope as though it were a lifeline. Every word felt like a betrayal etched in ink. Robert's name appeared repeatedly paired with hers. He was not just aware, he was complicit. The son I had nurtured, the young man I had raised to respect honesty, had lent his signature, or at least his consent, to a scheme designed to strip me of my home. Anger coursed through me, pure and sharp, mingling with disbelief. The house I had built from sweat stitches and savings, a sanctuary of 20 years, was being claimed by those I had trusted most. The betrayal was cold, calculated, and deliberate. I stood abruptly, my hands shaking, my mind racing through every possible response. I would not be silenced. I would not be intimidated. If the law could be twisted against me, I would learn its language. If deceit could challenge me, I would meet it with preparation and precision. The morning sun streamed through the windows, but I felt no warmth, only resolve. Whatever it took, I would protect my home, my legacy, and myself. I spent the morning sifting through every drawer, every folder, every box in my beach house, searching for anything that might prove ownership and document the chaos Megan and her family had wrought. Receipts for construction materials, old checks from clients. The original deed carefully filed in my safe, all reminders that every inch of this property had been earned through sweat, patience, and years of careful saving. With a camera in hand, I began photographing the damaged, trampled geraniums, overturned wicker chairs, the scorch marks on the stove, and the plastic bags that held my personal clothes, as if my life's work could be stuffed and discarded like trash. Each photo was a small talisman evidence that could not be ignored. I cataloged every piece, meticulously making notes in a leather-bound journal. Then I turned my attention to my finances. For decades, I had saved religiously, every dollar accounted for, every investment carefully considered. Now I called my bank manager, Alex Peterson, a steady, trustworthy man I had known for 15 years. "Alex," I said, "I need to make sure no one can access my accounts without my consent, and I need documentation verifying my mental capacity." He listened, understanding the urgency, and promised to issue immediate safeguards. Next, I called Thomas Gallagher, a family law attorney, recommended by a friend who specialized in elder asset protection. His secretary scheduled an emergency appointment for that afternoon. As I hung up the phone, a flicker of hope passed through me. For the first time that day, I felt a sense of control returning. I moved through the house again, imagining how I would present my case, the documents, the photos, the timeline of every intrusion. My strategy began to take shape, careful, deliberate, and unyielding. Megan and Robert had assumed I would be passive, but they had underestimated the resolve of a woman who had survived lost poverty and decades of hard work. I paused on the deck, the ocean stretching out before me, inhaling the salt air. For the first time since I had arrived, I felt empowered. I was no longer reacting. I was planning. Every step I took now, every phone call, every photograph was a move toward reclaiming what was rightfully mine. By evening, I had a folder filled with evidence, my finances secured, and a lawyer ready to fight. The house was still occupied by invaders, but the tide was turning. I would not allow arrogance, entitlement, or betrayal to succeed. The morning air was heavy with tension as I arrived at the beach house dressed in my best gray suit and carrying a folder of evidence that felt as heavy as my determination. Thomas Gallagher, my lawyer, stepped out of the car with a calm authority, followed by a police officer and a notary. Their presence turned my long-neglected sanctuary into a courtroom waiting to happen. On the deck, Megan and her family were in mid-chaos, grilling meat, laughing loudly, and moving chairs as if oblivious to the world outside their bubble. But when Megan caught sight of the official vehicles, her smile faltered. She set down the coffee cup she had been holding and took a step back, her composure cracking ever so slightly. "Good morning, Thomas," began his voice clear and unwavering. "I am attorney Thomas Gallagher, legal representative for Mrs. Lenora Whitfield, the lawful owner of this property. We have come to serve an immediate eviction order for illegal trespassing." Megan froze, her eyes darting between the police officer and the notary. "What are you talking about? This is our house," she spat, her voice rising in panic. "Robert said we could be here." The officer stepped forward. "Do you have documents proving any legal right to occupy this property?" Megan opened her mouth, but no words came. Robert, who had lingered behind her, shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. Thomas placed the eviction order firmly in Megan's hands. "This property is the sole ownership of Mrs. Whitfield. You have 2 hours to vacate with all personal belongings. Any items that belong to Mrs. Whitfield must remain." Megan's mother whispered something to her daughter, but neither offered resistance. Veronica began recording on her phone, but the officer quickly intervened. "Stop recording. This is an official legal proceeding." The chaos unfolded in real time. Megan shouted orders, trying to organize her children, while the teenagers argued over which items to pack first. I stayed on the deck, standing tall, feeling the weight of decades of effort finally validated. The laughter that had once been unbearable now seemed hollow, fading against the certainty of justice. One by one, they moved out their entitlement, evaporating under the scrutiny of the law. Robert carried the last of the suitcases with a resigned, haunted look. He met my gaze briefly, and I saw the hesitation, the guilt, but also the stubbornness that had always defined him. By the time the driveway was empty and quiet, the morning sun reflected off the windows of my reclaimed house. The garden, though trampled, awaited restoration. My sanctuary had been violated, mocked, and challenged, but it now belonged to me again. For the first time that day, I felt the full weight of control, pride, and vindication settle into my chest. The house was finally quiet. The last echo of laughter and shouting had faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of the ocean outside. I walked through each room carefully, inspecting the damage, moving broken furniture back into place, and setting the cushions just so. The garden still bore traces of trampling, but I already imagined the flowers blooming again, the scent of geraniums reclaiming the air. I paused on the deck, looking out at the horizon. For the first time in days, a sense of calm washed over me. This house was more than wood and brick. It was a testament to my resilience, my labor, and the life I had built from nothing. Megan and Robert had tried to take it from me, to strip me of my dignity. But they had failed. Later, I reinforced security, changing locks, installing cameras, and ensuring that no one could threaten my sanctuary again. I reviewed the legal documents one last time, satisfied that the house was fully mine protected, both by law and by the strength I had found in myself. I thought of my son Robert and the complicated love that remained. Forgiveness was not immediate, but my independence and self-respect were intact. I had reclaimed more than a house, I had reclaimed my power. And in that moment, standing alone on the deck I had built, I finally felt whole.